Chapter 40, The Devil You Know. The Devil You Know. The previous rains had left the air crisp, the cobbles still wet and glistening in the moonlight, and even the run-down streets of the quayside held a strange kind of beauty as Fritha and Nalia made their way back to the coronet. They had begun their evening in the promenade, wandering from tavern to tavern, sometimes following groups they had fallen in with, other times just the two of them, the night passing in a heady round of dancing and laughter, before they'd at last found themselves on the other side of the city, in a tavern just on the edge of the docks. There had been no room for dancing, cramped and crowded as the place had been, but a group of musicians were playing old local songs that all in Athkatla had grown up hearing, the whole of the tavern joining in at the choruses, united by the singing and their shared memories, and in that atmosphere of drunken camaraderie all were brothers, regardless of which side of the river you had grown up on. Something the girls could not help but get carried away by, and even as they had left the tavern, the feeling stayed with them still, their fingers entwined and swinging their arms between them as they made a leisurely pace back to the slums, Fritha singing at the top of her voice, her uninhibited joy wonderful to see. A roving, since roving spin my Russia iron, I'll go no more a roving with you fair maid. Well, what's this? Two young ladies out carousing. Came a smooth voice, the girls stopping as four young men stepped from the side street they had just reached to stand before them, and Nalia tensed slightly, her grip on Fritha's hand tightening. They were dressed in well-made if plain clothes, each armed with a dueling sword and with probably enough skill to use it if necessary, and Nalia placed them immediately as the sons of some of Athkatla's merchant families. The speaker, a tall lean youth with rather wiry brown hair and a long freckled nose, was slightly ahead of the others, two of the remaining men, both of the darker Amnian coloring, standing either side of a pale blonde third who looked to be deep in his cups and was swaying threateningly. The tall man took another step forward, and Nalia felt herself relaxing slightly at the warm laughter in his voice as he continued, "And there I was thinking fair Lyra herself had been cast again from the heavens by such singing." Fritha laughed, quite unembarrassed at being caught it seemed. "You best be careful, she may not take too kindly to that comparison." The youth grinned broadly, and the gesture suited him, giving his plain face a sudden impish charm. "Ah, I've no fear, for she knows I am a devoted patron of such things. I am Adric, ladies," he offered with a slight bow, "and these are my companions, Olwen, Thelen, and the rather worse for wear Cassis, who has recently quarrelled with his lady love and has decided to take his revenge by giving himself the most awful hangover tomorrow." Both groups shared a laugh at the irony of such truths, Cassis seemingly torn between joining them and cursing loudly for his friends to be silent. "This very moment we go to see some friends of ours who are playing at an alehouse near here," Adric continued with a smile. "Might I be so bold as to ask if you ladies would like to accompany us? The surroundings may be poor, but the musicians are the finest in the city." Fritha glanced to Nalia, an eyebrow raised. "What do you think?" Nalia dipped her face slightly to consider it. She was a little tired, to be honest, and yet in the same instance, she did not want the evening to end, so happy as she was. She sent the girl next to her a slight smile, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "Well, surely one more cannot hurt, can it?" Adric beamed, sweeping forward to gallantly take her free hand and plant a kiss upon the back. "Ah, wits as well as beauty, m'lady, you are a rare bird." "Oh, go to!" she scolded, batting him away. But Adric just laughed, moving to stand between the girls with an arm about each, and Nalia noticed his two more sober friends share a smile and roll their eyes behind him as the youth continued. "Now, how did it go? In Athkatla there lived a maid, mark well what I say." Fritha laughed delightedly, her clear high voice quickly joining his, and it seemed her joy was infectious. Nalia and the others soon joining them as they continued on their way.
In Athkatla there lived a maid, and she was mistress of her trade. I'll go no more a roving with you, fair maid. A roving, since roving spin my Russia iron, I'll go no more a roving with you, fair maid.
The tavern, it turned out, was only a short walk from the one they had just left, the peeling sign outside proclaiming the Waterdeep packet, while a silhouette of ship in full sail was painted underneath. A couple of streets in from the quays, it was a lot rougher than the other taverns they had spent their evening in, but there were musicians as promised, half a dozen or so couples already moving about the floor, and from the look of them Nalia suspected at least half of the women dancing were there on business rather than pleasure. Men glassy-eyed with drink stumbled past them with barely a glance, while others looked up from the tables to openly appraise, but Nalia did not much care either way. She never really felt properly afraid when Fritha was near. Adric led them forward, moving over to a table in the far corner that enjoyed a good view of the band, the youth drawing out a chair for her, though, before Nalia could sit a rough voice called out over the music.
"Ah, two fine ladies have deigned to grace our lowly tavern."
Nalia turned to see a man much older than they, probably of late middle age, with a wiry stooped appearance and who was clearly deep in his cups. He took another unsteady step towards them, his lined face twisted with disdain as he continued. "What you in here for?" Looking not to lose touch with the common man.
"'Cause I can help you there."
He gave Fritha a suggestive leer, the girl's face instantly pulling into an expression of such incredulous disgust, it would have been amusing under any other circumstances.
"No thanks, mate. I mean, there is slumming and then there is slumming." "Ha, well said, m'lady,"
began Olwen with a harsh bark of laughter, the stockier youth laying a hand expressively on his hilt, and Nalia noticed others about the room seemed to tense.
"We want no trouble, sir, so clear off." "And just who are you to tell me, boy?"
"Ah, leave
em be, Reve,"
growled a rough voice from the gloom behind them, Nalia just able to make out a face as old as Reve's, the skin tanned and weathered like old leather, his graying hair hanging lank to his shoulders.
"They've done naught to you?"
Reve seemed torn a moment, eyes fixed on the man at the table beneath him, before he shot one last disdainful look at their group and slunk off to the bar. Adric heaved a relieved sigh, the smile already back on his young face as he offered Nalia a seat, Thulin stepping round the table to draw one out for Fritha as Olwen nodded to the bar behind them.
"Right, shall I get us some drinks?"
And despite their troubled start, the evening was quite enjoyable, the youth's banter providing ready amusement as they shared stories, the young men always ready with a joke at one another's expense. They could not be accused of exaggeration either when it came to the music, their three friends who made up the band as fine musicians as any Nalia had heard before, and clearly better than an establishment of that sort could usually get. But, as Fritha had said, such was the way of things when you were starting out, the girl kindly telling Adric to let them know that should they ever wish to play at the Five Flagons she would vouch for their skill. Nalia smiled, sipping her wine as the sprightly melody of a jig drifted over her, the loud bodiness of her surroundings not offending her as she thought it would have, and she felt quite at ease as she watched the tavern about her. The man Reve was stood at the bar, paying them no heed as he chatted amiably with his own companions, while at the table next to them the man who had so neatly stepped in to end their altercation was still sat. The youths had been sure to buy the man a drink every time they had got a round in, and Adric was sat at his table talking to him now. Nalia sat next to the steadily drinking Cassis, while Fritha had taken to the floor with Olwen. Nalia let her gaze drift over to the girl as she tripped lightly through the steps, her amber curls dancing too as she moved, and every now and then they would catch in the torchlight to flash a bright burnished copper.
"Your friend's a fair one,"
came Cassis with a deep sigh, as though forming the words had been an effort, and Nalia smiled. eyes still trained on the dancers.
Yes. Yes, she is. All that hair, so bright and fiery, like the dawn, oh gods!
He wailed suddenly, Nalia whirling to him in alarm to see him sink his head into his hands.
Oh, I just love her so much. My sweet Abrasia.
The girl frowned, trying to force a sympathy to her manner as she awkwardly patted his arm.
There. Ah, sorry about this, m'lady,
came a voice at her shoulder, the welcome form of Thulin appearing, just returned from the bar and instantly taking the seat opposite, his dark eyes sending her smile as he gave the despairing man a hearty clap on the back.
Come now, Cassis, you and Abrasia quarrel like this at least once a 10-day. Why, she's probably at home now, lamenting this just as you are.
Nalia smiled gratefully, the youth giving her a grin and a wink as she slipped from her seat and moved on to the next table, Adric glancing up at her arrival and noticing the commotion she had left.
Baisun, look at the man. That's what love does to you, one little tiff and it's like the world's at an end. I don't know why he doesn't just marry the girl and be done with it.
Adric sighed, half exasperated, half amused, gracefully unfolding his long frame from the chair as he rose.
Please excuse me, m'lady, Barg.
Nalia and the man opposite both nodded politely, Nalia watching as the youth moved to join the pair before she turned back to her own table. The man she was left with looked no better close up, his worn face dominated by a heavy brow and thin lips which gave him a mean appearance, the girl smiling pleasantly as she forced herself to begin.
I must thank you, sir, for your intervention with Reve before, we had not wanted to cause any trouble.
The man's face broke into a wide grin, which had the dual effect of making him look much younger and far friendlier.
Ah, you're quite welcome, love. And there's no need for this sir either, just call me Barg. As for Reve, you pay him no mind. He don't like nobles much, especially when they come round here slumming and making sport of what other people have to make a living from, but I could see you two girls were all right when you came in. And here I am proved right. Both of you drinking and dancing, just having a good time like the rest of us, that's how it should be. Speaking of which...
He laughed, as Fritha arrived at their table, breathless and beaming, a glance behind confirming that poor Olwyn had also been enlisted in cheering his maudlin friend. Nalia smiled.
Did you enjoy the dance, dearest? You looked very nice. Indeed, she speaks very truly,
agreed Barg.
Nobles or not, you're both right nice girls.
Fritha grinned, looking rather pleased as she dropped into the chair next to her and poured herself some wine.
Cheers. I've always said at the end of the day you just got to judge as you find,
continued Barg sagely,
and having a title don't mean you're any better a person. Ah, I could tell you things about the nobility round here that would make your hair curl.
Fritha was clearly trying to hide her smile as next to her Nalia stifled a laugh, sending a pointing glance to the wavy mane of curls that covered the girl's shoulders while Barg continued, oblivious.
Take my boss for example. He's an all-right sort for a noble, a bit full of airs for me, but he treats me and the boys honorably enough, keeping the guard off our backs and the like. The guards,
repeated Nalia, feeling an unease stir in her stomach.
Love, we're pirates,
Barg announced blithely, and Nalia could not help but notice a few of the men at the surrounding tables glance up from their drinks.
Been in the trade nearly 40 years now, man and boy. My boss has us working the main routes south to Tether and Kalimshan. Oh, the others are dead quiet about it, but I'm right proud me, and it keeps those merchants on their toes for starters.
He laughed loudly, taking another drink before continuing.
Of course, my boss, he's into other things as well, but me and lads don't go in for slaving and the like. Slaving!
cried Fritha, sounding as appalled as Nalia felt, and Bard nodded, his manner suddenly solemn as he took in their shocked expressions.
I know, girls. And all the time walks about the city hobnobbing with nobles and magistrates as though butter wouldn't melt.
The man shook his head, lifting his cup for another mouthful.
He's a right piece of work, that I see and all.
Herr Dallas leant back against the fireplace with a slight sigh, a cup of wine lolling in his hand. Ari was but a pace from him, sat just as he was upon the hearthrug before a low fire, though she was infinitely less relaxed. The elf hunched over slightly as she mended his sleeve, sewing with sharp irritated movements, and the tiefling felt quite sorry for his coat, very glad that Ari had been in a better mood when she had tended his arm earlier. The bard sighed again, and more loudly this time, which earned him a glance from the girl opposite, though the atmosphere between them was no warmer for it, as she returned instantly to her work. Ari had been very brisk with him ever since the girls had left, something which he had initially, and erroneously, attributed to them leaving without inviting her. It was only when they had both retired to his room and he had gone to soothe her that he had discovered the true reason for her ill humor. Apparently, on the prime, it was not done to openly admire other girls when having just been sharing kisses with your own. His ensuing amusement at the irony of his mistake, had only, if possible, made her mood worse, as had his gently telling her there was no need to be jealous.
I am not jealous,
she had snapped, looking appalled he had even dared to suggest it, and it had taken quite a bit of talk to smooth those ruffled feathers, the girl finally breaking the silence between them with an offer to mend his coat. Now, though, he had the distinct feeling this had merely been a means of avoiding him rather than from any desire to mend the breach between them, the girl conveniently immersed in her work from that point on. Herr Dallas watched her as she sewed, her movements no less graceful for their sharpness. There had been a time not long past where Ari would have been too shy to dare reproach him for anything, and now here she was, in a strop over something he considered very slight indeed. He had to admit, he rather liked the change. With a sigh, Ari at last took up the delicate silver scissors from the rug next to her and cut the thread, the girl deftly avoiding his eye as she passed his coat back to him.
Here, your sleeve is mended. Ari, my dove,
he sighed, finding it very difficult not to smile in the face of her continuing petulance.
Come now, talk to me, we can solve nothing in this silence.
But she could clearly hear the amusement in his voice, Ari finally glancing up to fix him with an unusually piercing look.
You think I am being silly, don't you?
He went to refute it, but she had already continued.
Perhaps I am, but it is how I feel. You always flirt so readily with others. It is not that I am jealous, but it makes me feel what we have is lessened by the thought that any other pretty face could replace me.
Herr Dallas frowned, guilt tingling along his spine. He had never wished to make Ari feel uncared for, it was merely how he had always behaved, taking what pleasures were offered by his surroundings, and he sighed, slightly frustrated that the elf seemed to yet again require reassurance of his regard.
Ari, my love, you really must not think so. Just because I show an appreciation of others' beauty does not mean my regard for you is any less. Would you be making such a fuss if I had admired some jewel or poem? It isn't the same,
she sighed, and Herr Dallas shook his head gently.
Nay, indeed, the difference exists only in your mind. The girls looked very fair this evening, and I took pleasure in it and told them so. I could praise your own beauty with verse and song to last till the dawn if you wished it, but I fear the fact I would have to may rather mar what I was admiring.
Ari shot him a look, the color rising in her cheeks with her temper.
I would not expect nor wish you to, Herr Dallas. But is it so wrong of me to want something more of you than the words you offer every pretty girl? Our relationship deepens with every passing day, but you are still as far from me as you were when we met. I just want to grow close to you, but it is impossible. You will never share your past, never talk of our future. It is so disheartening when you refuse to speak of it, as though you do not believe we will have one.
Herr Dallas sighed again. The girl's way of seeing the world was so fundamentally different to his own. Why did she equate intimacy with knowledge of your partner for a start, when he knew of so many relationships brought to an end in the tedium of such familiarity? Had any of his previous loves been so? And he cast his mind back to Sigil and the far-reaching plains, trying to recall it. No, all had just seemed content enough to enjoy time and the passions they had had together, never fretting about where it would lead.
Ari, I do not understand you. All things are doomed to end and only in the present can we truly love, which I do and most sincerely. Is that not enough? The past is gone and buried, why restore it to unwelcome life with unnecessary talk? Let it rest as it should. And as for the future, oh my dove, love in the future is no more than fantasy. Well, I like to fantasize.
Ari burst out indignantly.
I like to imagine our future together. To dream and plan and play. I know nothing is certain, but if you were only imagining it as well, Herr Dallas, then at least I would know you would like to be there with me.
She trailed off, looking quite surprised by her outburst, and he could not help but laugh. She was quite unlike any girl he had ever met and he loved her for it. Yes, his previous relationships had been less tying, just two people enjoying the time the fates have given them. But he had been with the troupe back them, both blessed and cursed to follow their fortunes across the plains, and perhaps those women had entered into the thing knowing he would eventually leave, tempering the depths of their regard accordingly, and even if it was all doomed to end, it was rather nice. Ari looked upon the thing with an air of permanence. Was there truly any harm in indulging in some idle planning? He gathered an arm affectionately about her shoulders, leaning in to kiss her temple.
Oh my dove, as you will it. But I am no seer and this is all but a fiction, so you cannot blame me if our final performances differ.
Fritha was striding through the empty streets, Nalia at her side, her skirts gathered loosely in one hand as they hurried back to the slums, the pair chattering, quiet and feverish, as they went.
I cannot believe it,
hissed Nalia for the sixth time since they had left the tavern, the girl pale with worry and anger.
I do not think Barg was lying by any means, but Isia a slaver? The financer of pirates. I always knew he was a cad, but this? Something must be done, Fritha. That he would commit these atrocities is bad enough, but that he is using my birthright to do it, sullying the good name of my family.
She cried, for a moment furious before her worries overwhelmed her once more and she groaned miserably.
Oh, but what are we to do? No one will believe the word of a drunken pirate over that of a militia captain.
Fritha shook her head, anxious but resolute as they turned off the main street and down an alley she knew to be a good shortcut.
We'll think of something, Nalia, I promise you. We.
Fritha stopped dead as she suddenly realized they were not alone, the girls so focused on their own talk she had not noticed the other voices. Up ahead and half concealed in the gloom, a group of people were stood, a tall pale woman flanked by three men and talking to another two in the darkness, both with their faces obscured by deep cowls. Nalia tugged wordlessly at her sleeve and they took a step back, melting silently into the shadows of a rotting doorway.
And our offer still stands,
came the pale dark-haired gentleman from the larger group. Indeed, there was nothing else Fritha could have called him from the way he was dressed, in clothes that would have not looked out of place on the highest of nobles, and Fritha suddenly noticed his companions were no less richly attired, the other two men in shirts and coats of good cloth, while the woman wore a dark green gown of what looked to be silk, the stiff fabric shimmering in what little light there was.
Join our guild,
the gentleman continued,
and the rewards will be great indeed. Refuse and you will only fall with Aaron and the rest of his shadow thieves when the time comes.
Frithha felt Nalia's grip on her arm tighten and she nodded imperceptibly. The rival guild, they could be no one else.
Listen to him, Venrik, Tessel,
assured one of well-dressed men, his blonde hair grey in the gloom,
he speaks the truth.
The two men they were speaking to both nodded, the one more contemplatively than the other, their plain serviceable clothes looking even drabber next to the finery of those with who they were talking.
I don't doubt it,
began the shorter of the two, his voice slow and measured.
But there are some things worth more than fine clothes and a heavy purse, a man's conscience for instance. I never thought I'd see you turncoat, Reed.
Tessel! cried the man at his side, but Reed just shook his fair head.
No, his words are fair, Venrik. 10 years I had been working for Renal, and I was hardly any better off than when I joined the guild. Every night I was out, risking the guards and mask knows what else to make my tithes, only to make Aaron and the other heads richer. When the Lady Parisa came to me I did not hesitate a moment.
Reed dipped a slight bow to the woman next to him and Frithha watched as she stepped forward with a rustle of silk, a shaft of moonlight driving back the gloom that had concealed her before. She was just as pale as the well-dressed gentleman next to her, her white skin almost grey in parts while dark ringlets fell to her shoulders, the pair so similar in appearance they could have been brother and sister, and there was an unnatural grace to her movement that left Frithha cold.
It is all as Reed says,
the woman agreed smoothly,
and you will find gold enough can inspire the treason of knights and quiet the conscience of even the most devout priest. And for those too honorable for that, we have other methods of persuasion.
Parisa and her equally pale companion glanced pointedly to each other, though it was not until the women smiled knowingly at him that Frithha realized the truth of it, her bright white fangs almost glowing in the gloom. Vampires! There could be no doubt, and their veiled talk about persuasion suddenly made sense. Frithha swallowed, holding her arms rigid at her sides in an effort to stop the tremble in her hands. She would not have wanted to come upon this group under normal circumstances, armed and with the others around her. But now, when she was there alone with Nalia, without sword or armor or anything. She swallowed again, the inside of her mouth feeling tacky and cloy. There was only one way out of this now. Silently she gestured back the way they had come, the pair edging along the alley with an aching slowness, and were almost around the corner and back into the relative safety of the main street when it happened. Her eyes trained so wholly on those before her, Frithha did not notice the grate until she had stepped upon it, the metal grill flipping up with her weight to crash back onto cobbles, the clang pealing along the empty street, impossibly loud, and in the gloom Frithha watched the silent dismay twist Nalia's face, her own dread rising as the voices they had left in the alley stopped instantly, silence holding them until.
"We know you are there,"
called Parisa, her tone smooth and commanding.
"Come out where we can see you."
Frithha swallowed dryly, raising a hand to indicate for her to wait, and Nalia shook her head vehemently, making to step forward. But Frithha pushed her back, an angry determination to her eyes that belied the mildness of her touch, and before Nalia could raise any other objection, the girl turned on her heel and stepped into the alley. Frithha carried herself forward with small scurrying steps, her heart beating so wildly she was finding it difficult to draw breath. She could do this. She had done such before, at the bandit encampment of Peld's Vale, at the Iron Throne in the gate. Only on those occasions there had still been room for error, and the idea a mistake here would undoubtedly mean her death was making her manner all the more difficult to master. "Come on, focus!" snapped a voice behind her eyes, angry in her fear, and with a deep breath Frithha took herself back to the girl she had been a few years ago, before she had been driven from Candlekeep, artless, good and too useless to be any threat, someone you would not even take the trouble to kill. Frithha swallowed. The fear she needed to present was very easy to come by, and it was merely her naivety that was pretense. Parisa sending her a cool appraising look as the girl stopped before them, nervously fiddling with the tails of her sash.
"So, child, you heard us speaking.
She began and Fritha nodded, pausing a moment before she answered hesitantly, as one who suspects they are in trouble, but does not know what they have done wrong, a manner she got very good at back in Candlekeep.
Yes, m'lady. I went to take a shortcut home and then I heard voices. Just voices? Then why did you go to hide yourself?
Demanded the gentleman, his dark eyes boring into hers. Fritha dipped her face, twisting her the sash more violently as she considered her reply. There was a sure answer to this, considering the time and the area, but should she risk it?
Well, begging your pardon, but I didn't want to interrupt anything. Many girls work round here of an evening and I thought you might have been a lady of the night, as it were.
A moment of silence before the woman began to laugh, deep and throaty, the man at her side clearly outraged.
A lady of the... She calls you a whore, Parisa. Oh hush, Durst,
the woman dismissed, her amusement dying as suddenly as it had begun.
As for you child, what is your name? Tilombre, m'lady,
Fritha answered, taking a moment to add with a hesitant smile,
oh only they all call me Tila Mber for my hair.
Durst's eyes narrowed.
You do not sound as though you are from Athkatla. What are you doing in the city? If it please you, I'm from further north, from the town of Bergost, but I've come to the city to learn to become an actress. I am a member of the crown troupe,
she added, considering that if any trouble was to come of this she may as well send it their way and return the favor. Parisa watched her unblinkingly for what felt like hours, Fritha trying to hold on to her timorous innocence as her heart rattled in her ribcage, the moments creeping slowly by until even the thieves began to fidget. Venrik, the taller of the two deserters, first to break the silence, his hand twitching nervously over the hilt of his dagger.
Perhaps we should deal with it, just in case, like. We can't have this getting back to the guild. Leave over, Venrik,
snapped Tessel, pulling his friend's arm roughly away from the blade.
She's just a kid.
But Parisa paid them no mind, eyes still fixed on her, and silence fell again with the realization that this was not to be a group decision.
Parisa!
Came Durst, the woman not sparing him a glance as at last she spoke.
Go, child, and tell no one of what you saw here.
Fritha nodded, scurrying back in the main street where her stride instantly lengthened, the girl not even pausing as she linked arms with Nalia to pull the girl after her. And the pair made it to the end of the street before they broke into a dead run, which did not cease until the docks were far behind them. Fled though they had from the docks, it had been over an hour later before they had finally returned to the coronet, the girls walking the maze of darkened streets, taking every measure to ensure they had not been followed. A breathless good night in the hallway, and each had retired immediately to their own rooms, both clearly shaken and needing some time alone to deal with the disturbing revelations the night had provided them. Fritha stood at her dresser, her heart still beating much more heavily than usual as she watched the mirror before, the girl within pale and drawn, her bright clothes a mockery of the bleak dread she felt, and she could not seem to forget the way Parisa had looked at her, so cold and predatory. For all her lies, it was only by that creature's grace that they had been allowed to leave unharmed, and the idea that they had avoided death by such a fine degree was overwhelming. With trembling hands Fritha took up the jug and filled the cracked wash-basin before her, stooping slightly as she went to scoop some water across her face, and she only just stifled a cry, pulling her fingers back from the suddenly scalding water. She shook her hand vehemently, a stream of curses running through her mind as the pain slowly faded, and she turned again to the bowl, watching the shimmering curls of vapor rising from the water within. With quick, almost panicked movements Fritha flung open her window and emptied the contents into the street below before returning the basin to her dresser, the girl almost dropping the jug in her haste to refill it. 3 more times she heated the water with but a thought before she finally convinced herself it was not just some sort of accident. The magic she knew was trapped within herself was finally out, it seemed, and yet the thought was not a welcome one. Fritha took a step back, sinking onto the bed behind to rest her head in her hands with a wavering sigh. It seemed impossible that a few hours ago she had been walking hand in hand with Nalia, singing with a joy that had filled her very heart. Now, with the sudden discovery of a guild of vampires in the city and the clear pain Isia's alleged crimes had brought Nalia, the additional discovery of her magic left Fritha feeling as though she did not even know herself anymore, let alone the world. Fritha glanced again to the mirror opposite, the blurred outline of a copper-haired girl just visible in the steam-misted glass and providing a far more accurate reflection of her feelings than her face. Breakfast in the common room was the usual noisy affair, and though Jahara would never say she was getting used to it, she was slowly finding the bustle easier to ignore. The druid was at their usual table, the others sat about her as they awaited their first meal, everyone present with the exception of the squire who had left early with plans to attend morning prayers and collect Anarg's cup on his return, the order intent on keeping hold of it until the very last moment it seemed. Jahara took up the large pot the maid had just placed on their table, moving to serve the tea and Minsk helped her, Ari and Herr Dallas barely noticing as the large man pushed 2 filled cups before them, so caught up in each other as they were. Something Jahara was surprised the 2 girls had so far refrained from commenting on, Fritha and Nalia both pale and quiet, only lifting their attention from the table to cast unreadable looks at each other, and the druid suspected they may now be regretting their nighttime jaunt and the liberal amounts of wine which had no doubt accompanied it. Jahara smiled to herself, glancing up as the tavern door creaked open, a no-man appearing to march over to their table and take a seat, and Jahara instinctively passed him the cup she had just filled.
"Good morning, a no-man. You have the chalice."
A no-man swallowed the sip of tea he had just taken and nodded slowly.
"Yes, my lady, though I must inform you that Sir Ryan Troll was still very reluctant to part with it even this morning. As the commander says, if Anarg is reunited with his cup, it will merely strengthen his name about the city as a paladin, putting the order in a very poor light whilst making him even more dangerous."
A no-man sighed heavily.
"And so, Sir Ryan has given us but 3 days to return the cup to the order once more." "What?"
Jahara exclaimed, hardly able to believe what she was hearing.
"So soon? But Anarg will surely believe he can keep it."
A no-man nodded gravely, a troubled darkness in his pale eyes.
"No doubt. I believe Sir Ryan wishes to force Anarg's hand and make the man show his true nature." "Perhaps we could give it to Anarg,"
considered Ari aloud,
"and then steal it back from him later. We have already stolen it from the order, after all." "Yes, Ari, but we did not actually accomplish that task."
Jahara sighed, the elf flushing as she shot her an angry look, though the druid barely noticed, her attention already half turned to the 2 girls opposite, who had been surprisingly silent during the exchange.
"You 2 are very quiet this morning, how was your evening?"
The girls shared a wary look and Jahara frowned, she had the distinct impression she was not going to like their answer.
"Well, it was very enjoyable up to a point,"
admitted Fritha after a pause, the girl swallowing as she continued nervously.
"Now don't go mad, Jahara, but on the way back we may have had a run-in with that rival guild of Renals." "Oh, did you indeed?"
Jahara continued slowly as she tried to rein in her temper, she should have known the pair going out alone would end in folly.
"Since you are here and unharmed, I assume the meeting was in our favor. Do you have an idea as to where Renal's thieves are disappearing?" "Well, yes, and perhaps the reason so many are leaving too."
Fritha swallowed again, looking as though she was having to steel herself to continue.
"Though I'm pretty sure it can't count for all of their guild, 2 of the ones we saw, well, they were vampires.
There was a deafening clatter as a Nomen simultaneous knocked his cup to the floor and Minsk slammed a fist on the table to bellow what? A suddenly white Airy hastening to hush him, and even Herr Dallas looked more troubled than intrigued by this revelation. Jahara flexed her hands under the table, finding it difficult to speak past her rage as she leaned across the table towards them, her voice little more than an angry hiss.
There were vampires abroad last night and you 2 were wandering about the city without any means of defending yourselves.
Frithha frowned, physically squaring up to her, though she didn't look overly sure of herself as she made her reply.
Well, come on. What good would a sword have been against a pair of bloody vampires anyway? If anything, leaving it off helped. I just looked like any other citizen and unimportant enough to be allowed to live.
And the girl quickly described the meeting for them, explaining, from what they had heard before their discovery, how this rival guild had gained power in the city so quickly, some people deserting the Shadow Thieves willingly while others were being convinced to change their allegiances by other more insidious methods. Jahara watched the group around her as the girl spoke. It was strange how everyone reacted so predictable even to such shocking news. Aries' worry, Minsk's outrage, while Herr Dallas actually blithely congratulated Frithha on her acting ability. The only reaction that truly surprised Jahara was a Nomen's. Livid though she had been, it was nothing compared to the squire's anger. The man sat silent as Frithha told her tale, his face pale and set, lips pressed into a thin line as though to keep himself from bellowing at her. As for Frithha, the girl's stance on going out unarmed remained indignant, but Jahara could tell it was a front for the same fear she herself felt, the girl clearly as scared as she was by the idea of what could have happened had the vampires not been so easily appeased, and that alone had calmed the druid.
Anyway,
Frithha sighed, once she had finished, sending a glance to Nalia who nodded imperceptibly.
Any more talk on this will have to come later, because vampires weren't the only thing we encountered last night. We were in a tavern a couple of streets in from the quays when we met a man who claimed he was a pirate in the employ of no other than ARandomAudiobookAppeared. Your betrothed?
Gasped Airy and Nalia nodded wordlessly, Frithha quickly relating all of what Barg had revealed to them. The girl finished, a silence hung over the table, everyone casting wary glances to one another when Jahara finally asked the inevitable question.
And what do you intend to do?
Frithha took a long draught of tea and when she spoke her tone was unusually grave.
There is only one man who can help with this now.
And Jahara sighed as the squire began to color, the group around her dropping their heads as they prepared for the imminent argument. Frithha stared up at the plain grey building before her, the breeze coming in from the sea that morning, cold and carrying a thread of rain, and next to her she watched Nalia shiver under her cloak. A Nomen's anger at her plans to meet with Renal had been fierce but short-lived, the man once more pointing out the imprudence of putting themselves at the mercy of thieves and warning that these were favors the thief master would surely expect to be repaid before storming off to the bar for a new cup, seemingly no more to say on the matter. At her side, Nalia stirred.
He is not expecting us, is he?
She confirmed, sending a pensive look to the building before them.
Do you think he will be able to see us?
Frithha shrugged.
Renal's very good about making time for me, and we always have news of this guild to tempt him,
she added with a smile which she was glad to see returned.
Do you want to wait for me inside or would you prefer to walk down to one of the inns on the quayside and wait there?
Nalia turned sharply to face her at those words though.
Wait for you? Frithha, I mean to come with you, we will see Renal together.
Frithha stood silent a moment. She didn't know why she hadn't expected Nalia to want to join her in the meeting, but at the same time she did not want the girl to attend too. Fritha did not yet know what she would have to trade for the information should Renal prove unwilling, and she did not want a situation to arise where Nalia was forced to choose between exposing Isia at some great cost or allowing him to just continue with his depredations. Fritha would rather bear that decision alone, and it wasn't as though she hadn't had more than enough practice of choosing the lesser evil by now.
Nalia, I can deal with this better on my own. Fritha,
the girl cried, her frustrations rising.
You know how vital this is to me. I want to be there. Yes, I do understand how important this is, and that is why I must insist I go alone. That way I will have the best chance of getting the information we need. I don't see how.
The girl muttered, trailing off to shake her head in defeat, and Fritha smiled kindly, taking a step towards the doors.
Come on, dearest.
Inside, Nalia moved to settle on some crates just by the door, Myrtle appearing instantly, and after a quick conversation the bright girl was leading Fritha up the stairs to show her through to Renal's office, the man glancing up from the paper-strewn desk as they entered, and he was on his feet and stepping forward to welcome her in, but a moment later.
Ah, Fritha, my dear, always a pleasure,
he smiled warmly, taking her hand as he gestured to the cushions before his low desk, before moving past her towards the door.
I shall send for some tea. I've just had the most wonderful blend brought in from Karatur that I know you will appreciate, almost citrus in its aftertaste. I am grateful you would think of me,
she answered, the gravity to her voice halting him.
But I must ask we put aside our usual pleasantries. I believe you will appreciate my promptness when I tell you it pertains to your rival guild.
Renal took a step back towards her, his manner suddenly all business.
You have news of them? I have,
and Fritha told him everything of her meeting with Parisa and the others, though she left out the names of the two potential deserters, knowing it would mean their deaths, although she was sorely tempted in Venrik's case. Silence followed her news, Renal frowning and contemplative, and he at last returned to his seat, gesturing vaguely once more for her to do the same, the girl sinking slowly onto the cushions opposite him and drawing a deep breath as she steeled herself for her next task.
I thank you for this news, Fritha. You are most welcome, and there is something else I must ask you, Renal, a matter of great importance. I need to know what links ARandomAudiobookAppeared has to less reputable activities in the city.
Renal glanced up, blinking a moment, still a touch distrait before shaking his head, smiling faintly.
Ah, Fritha. ARandomAudiobookAppeared has no ties with the Shadow Thieves. That does not mean you don't know what he is doing.
Fritha swallowed, her voice coming slightly hoarse as for a moment she considered returning to Nalia empty-handed.
Please, Renal, this is really important.
The old thief sent her a contemplative look.
Is that so? Why then did you not ask of him before you gave me this news of the guild?
Fritha frowned.
You were already owed such under the terms of our deal. To withhold it from you in exchange for something else would have been wrong.
Renal smiled wryly, shaking his head.
Ah, my dear Fritha, some men would say such honesty makes a fool of you, but I am not one of them. Aaron, the Shadow Master makes it a point to keep well informed about those whose traits edge onto our own just in case they have the imprudence to cross him, and I know for a fact Isia keeps the majority of his records, both good and ill, in the Sithkatla residence in the northwest of the city. But I would work quickly, were I you.
He continued, a graver tone creeping into his voice.
Barg was pulled from the harbor early this morning, his throat had been cut. It would perhaps seem you were not the only ones he was relating stories of his employer to last night, or at least not the only ones who heard him, and they did not appreciate the telling. But, of course, if anyone should ask, you did not hear any of this from me.
Fritha rose and bowed deeply.
My thanks, Renal.
The man stood too, taking her hand to dip a bow of his own.
And my thanks to you, my dear. This news you have brought us will help greatly, and I wish you good hunting.
They shared a smile, both wan and slight with thoughts of troubles yet to come, before he released her and she was off, clattering down the stairs to the anxiously waiting Nalya. Fritha quickly explained to her friend all Renal had told her as they hurried back to the inn. The girl had visited Isia's Athkatla residence more than once when they were betrothed, and though well guarded with both men and dogs, she was confident enough of the layout to make what they had planned possible. Time was of the essence though, something not everyone seemed to agree on as they informed the others.
You would go now to try and find this proof? This very day?
Exclaimed Jahara, the group sharing wary looks as they found themselves sat once more about a table in common room. Nalya frowned.
You heard what Renal told Fritha, Barg is dead. That means Isia could already know that someone is aware of his activities. He could be destroying the evidence of his wrongdoing at this very moment. This could be our only chance to expose him. And did you not hear Anomen this morning? We have only 3 days to infiltrate this group of paladins. They could be performing the most terrible acts. As could Isia. And under the banner of my house.
The truth of each argument seemed to silence the other, and for a moment no one spoke, until Anomen quietly cleared his voice and began.
Could you not inform the guards of Isia's activities, my lady? They would surely have to investigate if you brought such claims against him.
Nalya sighed wearily and shook her head.
Isia is a captain of the Athkatlan militia and a member of one of the most respected noble families in I am the absconded daughter of a dead lord and have supposedly lost my mind. My word will not stand against his. There is no justice for men such as he in this city. That is why we need evidence of this wrongdoing before we make any claims, that way they cannot be ignored. I understand you are upset, Nalya,
reasoned Ari tentatively,
but Barg could have been killed by his own crew, couldn't he? Fritha said they weren't happy about him telling everyone they were pirates. Isia may not even know about it. And we have already agreed to investigate Anarg. So you would have me merely hope that Isia has not heard of this yet?
Snapped Nalya.
And if he has, Ari? And if, at this very moment, he is destroying the evidence we need to expose him? Or would you have me sit and do nothing while Isia uses my lands to oppress the very people my father would have had me serve? Well, it isn't my decision anyway.
Ari mumbled sourly and all seemed to turn slowly to Fritha. The girl looked from the stern face of Jahara to the equally determined visage of Nalya and sighed deeply.
We will do both. Nalya and I will go and find evidence of Isia's criminal activities while the rest of you can continue our infiltration of the paladins.
A moment of silence, Ari sending a nervous glance about the table before offering hesitantly,
You Uncle Quail always said if you do 2 things at once, you'll do neither very well. Oh, shut up, Ari!
Snapped Nalya, more than one person about the table crying her name in admonishment, though she ignored them. Fritha sent her a stern look, her voice firm as she continued.
It is the only way that I can see to expose both Isia and Anarg. And how do you intend to find the evidence you need, my lady?
Asked Anomen, and for all her resolve, Fritha had to pause a moment before she confessed.
Renal has told us that Isia is rumoured to keep all records of such dealings at his Athkatla estate, away from his parents' prying eyes. Nalya has visited there more than once and is confident of the layout and where we might find these documents. We will break into his estate and retrieve them. Break in?
Anomen repeated, so stunned it seemed he had forgotten to be angry.
You are going to rob one of the most highly regarded noble houses in Athkatla. Anomen, he could be a slaver,"
cried Nalia, a hint of desperation creeping into her voice now.
"Do you not think the means to stop him is worth such a minor transgression?"
But the man just shook his head, sitting back in his chair as though physically withdrawing from the conversation, while, at his side, Minsk looked grave.
"Minsk understands that this Isia is doing terrible things, but you are going to his home in the daylight? Surely it is guarded, yes." "A guard of 10 men and a kennels,"
provided Nalia quietly. Minsk shook his head.
"Who says the risk to young Nalia and Fritha is too high?"
Herr Dallas nodded thoughtfully.
"Minsk may be right. If you are going to proceed, perhaps I should attend as well, my raven."
Fritha was rather touched he would volunteer, but Jahara looked no less than furious by this offer.
"Oh, just what we need, more players taking part in this idiocy. And what use do you think you will be of anyway, Bard? As I recall, your skills certainly were not sharp enough when it came to Mekrath."
She snapped, some resentment clearly lingering over his previous manipulations. Herr Dallas seemed to swell with indignation.
"Well, my frumpy ptarmigan." "Peace, all of you!"
snapped Fritha, her nerves at what she knew she was going to have to attempt making her terse.
"We've no more time for discussion. Now, can anyone think of a better way of handling both before it's too late for either?"
she demanded, the silence that followed all the answers she needed.
"Exactly."
She sighed again, rising from her chair.
"I should go and prepare. Please excuse me."
Fritha stood at her bed, hurriedly pulling things from her bag, weighing each contemplatively in her hand a moment before either pushing it quickly back inside or else throwing it to land neatly on the growing pile of books, bottles, and other assorted bits and pieces that would only be an unnecessary burden in the upcoming venture. A cold dread had been churning in her stomach ever since her meeting with Renal, to the point where she felt almost sick with it. The knowledge that the time when she and Nalia must act was drawing ever closer, and without any increase in her confidence that it would work or that it was even the right course to follow in the first place. A soft knock at the door behind her, and she glanced back to see Jahara enter, the woman a lot calmer than she had been downstairs, though there was still a determined set to her jaw, a familiar defiance burning in her eyes, and Fritha turned back to her packing as the druid began.
"Fritha, I must speak with you about this fool's errand you have planned. Quite apart from the obvious dangers, the paladins know you as our leader, it will look suspicious if you are not present."
Fritha shook her head. "I cannot come, Jahara. Reynold and the others spoke to all of us, I have no special rapport with them. And they will hold a no man closer, being a
failed knight as he can lead things in my absence."
The woman next to her drew a breath, and Fritha could tell she was trying to keep her temper.
"Fritha, I understand you feel strongly about this, but your—"
Jahara paused to find the word.
"Loyalty to Nalia is making you reckless. I know the girl is worried that time is running out, that if you do not expose Isia now, you never will, but you must think of your other responsibilities. Fritha, you should be accompanying us. A no-man has not your skills of deception, and the paladins are expecting you. Moreover, you are attempting to break into a no doubt well-guarded estate in broad daylight. If you get caught—" "We won't get caught." "If you get caught," continued Jahara firmly, "there will be nothing we can do for you, the law is quite clear. Would you be content to rot in prison whilst Mon is still at the wizard's mercies? You would stop your search for her?"
the girl questioned, though she already knew the answer, and so did Jahara, the woman sending her a frustrated look. Fritha sighed.
"No, I thought not. Besides, it will not come to that." "Fritha!"
the druid finally snapped, but Fritha cut her off.
No. I'm sorry, Jahara, but I am going. No one else can help Nalia and I cannot desert her at this moment any more than I could desert Imoen. Now, unless you have something helpful to impart.
Jahara stared at her, silent a long while, and when she finally spoke her voice was quiet and slightly hoarse.
Here,
she said, taking a small vial from her pocket to press into her hand.
A sleeping draught. If you can find a way of feeding it to the guard dogs, you will have an easier time making it through the grounds.
Fritha looked down at the bottle a moment, the dark green glass bright against her palm, before she glanced again to Jahara, the tiredly resigned look the woman was wearing making the girl feel suddenly tearful.
Thank you, Jahara.
The woman pulled her into a swift embrace.
Just come back safely, child. Fritha, are you read?
Came a familiar voice behind her.
Oh, sorry, No, it's fine,
Fritha answered, breaking apart from Jahara to offer Nalia a wan smile, the girl peering shyly round the door. Fritha turned again to Jahara, trying to force a brightness to her voice.
I'll see you back here soon.
The druid just nodded though and turned away, her look empty. Just a moment to quickly brief Inomen and the pair were outside, walking the familiar streets towards the bridge, Fritha trying to forget the look Jahara had given her as they had left. And the memory of the woman's embrace, fierce with worry and frustration, stayed with her longer still. End of chapter.